Aye, the contrary no. I think the ayes have it. Clerk?
Government business, order of the day number 1, Norfolk Island Legislation Amendment Bill 2015, resumption of debate on the second reading.
I understand that it is the wish of the House to debate this order of the day concurrently with the 7 related bills. Is there any objection? There is being no objection, the Chair will allow that course to be followed. And I call the honourable member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a very historic day for the community on Norfolk Island. This legislation will forever change the governance arrangements for the people of Norfolk Island and indeed provide for them, for the first time, access to all the services and all the rights that other Australian citizens take for granted. Madam Speaker, oh no, Mr.
I'll take it.
There's been a change. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I was a member of the Joint Standing Committee on the National Capital and Extended Territories, and I welcomed the report which was passed down by that committee, Same Country, Different World, which was presented here in this parliament in October of last year. That report made 8 recommendations which had universal cross-party support within this parliament and had wide support across the Norfolk Island community, although there has been and continues to be contention about one of the recommendations, that is to effectively end the Self-Government Act of Norfolk Island and to set up a new legislative framework and a new governance structure which provides regional government to the community. And I understand that that's a cause of concern, but nevertheless it is my strong view that this legislation is important to the future of Norfolk Island and to the Norfolk Island community. I have been associated in one way or the other with discussion around these issues since the early 1990s, and it has been a cause of much frustration to not only myself, but I know other members of this parliament, former ministers, who have found it almost impossible to get the sort of reforms that were required to move Norfolk Island forward. So this parliamentary committee report provided the opportunity for the government to respond to the recommendations of the report. It has done that in the form of this legislation, where it is effectively adopted the principal recommendations of that report. It is time for action. It is time to address the economic development of Norfolk Island, to address declining employment, to create growth in a range of industries, but particularly in tourism, to better manage the revenue and expenditure of the island community, and to bring an even greater confident outlook to the community of Norfolk Island and a satisfaction to the lifestyle of the islanders equal to other communities on the mainland, which is their right. The objectives of this legislation are to reform governance arrangements of Norfolk Island and to the extension of mainland social security, immigration, health arrangements and changes to the tax system. The Norfolk Island community, so people understand, currently does not have, there's no access to the age pension, there's no access to family tax benefits, does not fully participate, people on Norfolk Island do not fully participate in the Australian taxation system. They don't have access to the Medicare and pharmaceutical benefit entitlements of other Australians. They don't have access to the protections of employment laws that other Australians have. So these changes are fundamental and are very, very important. This legislation will introduce changes through a transitional period over the next 12 months, so that from July 2016, Norfolk Island residents will pay income tax and other direct federal taxes on all their incomes, and obviously get the benefits of being members of the Australian community through the other entitlements which I've referred to. The introduction, for example, of the mainland social security and taxation systems will have enormous economic benefits to the island community. These systems will provide, in my view, confidence in investment in the island. There is strong bipartisan support that the Norfolk Island Regional Assembly, the Norfolk Island Legislative Assembly, transition to a regional council. The template for local government, in this case this regional council structure, is going to be unique for each territory, in particular in this case on Norfolk Island, but I will in a moment refer to the other external territories which we have. I have the fortune of being the member for Lingiari, which includes the external territories of the Cocos Islands and the Christmas Island. What this legislation we have before us will do is effectively bring Norfolk Island in line with Christmas and Cocos in terms of the governance arrangements and in terms of their treatment for taxation purposes. There are obviously different environmental circumstances to Norfolk Island, but the challenges are remarkably similar. The regional council to be established on Norfolk Island will have to make decisions about what services can be managed and can be delivered. There is, we need to appreciate that as a result of this legislation, effectively the body of law which will apply in terms of state-type functions will become that of the laws of New South Wales as they're changed from time to time. But ultimately, the person responsible for those laws will not be the New South Wales Premier as they apply to Norfolk Island, but will be the Minister responsible for territories in this Parliament. And I know that there is a concern which has been expressed on other occasions about people not having access to the New South Wales Parliament when decisions are made by that Parliament about laws which will have an impact on Norfolk Island. This is true also of decisions which have been taken in the West Australian Parliament in the case of Christmas and the Cocos Islands around laws of Western Australia which apply on Christmas and the Cocos Islands. There will need to be the development of service delivery arrangements for the range of state-type services that will apply on Norfolk Island, as has been the case for Christmas Island. This will include, for example, potentially health and hospital services, adequate roads, infrastructure, maintenance, the application of the Local Government Act and many other spheres of activity. The coming 12 months of what is titled the interim transition time under the legislation are critical for the future of Norfolk Island as a new foundation is laid through a local advisory council to be appointed by the Minister as a precursor to the election of a regional council. Now it is important, and I want to encourage people of Norfolk Island to put their names forward if they think they want to be a participant on this advisory council. This is not a council which is here to do the bidding of the Minister. This is a council to provide advice to the government around issues to do with the transition process on Norfolk Island. And as we know, as a result of this legislation, other federal laws will apply which currently don't apply on Norfolk Island. And as the Minister Briggs pointed out in his second reading speech earlier in the year, the changes in this legislation will bring Norfolk Island in line with other Australian communities and ensure services are delivered to a modern standard by the appropriate level of government, as it should be. Now, I've said earlier that I've had some experience of these matters before, and it is a challenge. And it must be a partnership between the Commonwealth and Norfolk Islanders in terms of the process for implementing these reforms. It is really imperative that the community is brought along, that there is adequate and appropriate consultation, that people are involved in the discussions as equals, and not be seen as being vassals. They've got to be put in a position where they understand they have a real voice, and I'm sure that will be the case if this consultation process, which I understand and know that the Minister envisages, takes place. But having said that, there has been feedback from Norfolk Island about people being unhappy with the consultation processes currently in play, and whilst many islanders are excited and express their support at the prospect of changes, they are nonetheless apprehensive, and that's to be understood, and we need to appreciate it. And it is therefore important that this consultation period is an effective consultation period where people feel as if they are engaged in the decision-making process in providing advice ultimately to the governments. Islanders clearly need to be informed of when the consultations are going to take place, and they want to make sure so that they can make sure that their voice is really heard and to give them a say. We need to make sure that there is a clear understanding of how the benefits which are derived from getting access to mainstream services will impact upon those communities. I know the member for Canberra, who will speak later, will have the great good fortune of having, as a result of this legislation, the Norfolk Island voters voting in her electorate. In my case, the external territories of Christmas and Cocos vote in my electorate. For the purposes of federal elections from here on in, it will mean that the Norfolk Islanders will be voting in the electorate of Canberra, and the member for Canberra will be their Member of Parliament. She already has people on Norfolk Island who have voted in her electorate in the past, because that's been a capacity for people to choose which electorate they voted in effectively. But she will now have the responsibility of representing them here in the Parliament, and I know she'll be a very strong voice for their interests, as she has been thus far. But it is important that, and as I said at the outset, this is an historical piece of legislation. Things will change forever for the people of Norfolk Island. And instead of some people working 2, 3 or 4 jobs and not having access to appropriate health care, not having support service if they're aged, not getting access to the social security system and income support, not getting proper protections as employees, life will change. Life will change for them. It will give them great benefit so that they are fully members of the Australian community, just like all of us in this parliament and everyone in our own home electorates. And that's the important message here. I understand the concern about people saying that this means our rights are being trammelled because self-government has been taken away from us. Well, frankly, self-government didn't work. Frankly, self-government didn't work. It was clearly not sustainable. And I said that I'd been engaged in discussions about this 20 years ago. I did. I went to the island in the mid-1990s as the person responsible for the external territories and initiated discussions with people about normalising taxation arrangements and changing governance. This discussion has been ongoing. The first inquiry took place in Norfolk Island in 1979. So the fact that we're here today with this legislation as a result of many inquiries, a royal commission into the affairs of Norfolk Island, and frankly, and I know it's a harsh statement, but in part the fact that we're doing this today is because of the obduracy of some elements of the Norfolk Island community, not all, some. Because I know from my own experience and personal interaction, there are very strong advocates in the Norfolk Island community for the changes which we are putting in place today. But I give this undertaking, and I know this is something which will be shared by my colleagues on this side of the chamber, and I'm sure even on the government benches, that we do want to make sure this works to your benefit. We do want to make sure that you're engaged in the discussions, the decision-making, which will happen around the future of Norfolk Island, and we do want to make sure that these changes are to your benefit. Mr Deputy Speaker, I commend this legislation to the House.
I thank the member for Lingiari and call the member for Cowan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I certainly welcome this opportunity to speak on this important legislation surrounding the changes for Norfolk Island. I had the great fortune, Mr Deputy Speaker, to visit Norfolk Island in 1979 as part of a school excursion when I was in Year 10, so a long time ago. And I can look upon what my recollections were of that, of what was going on Norfolk Island then, and compare it to the several trips that I've made since I've been a member of the Joint Standing Committee for the National Capital and External Territories. And the changes have not been good, unfortunately. Still, Norfolk Island has been a beautiful place, will always be a beautiful place, a beautiful part of Australia. But when you consider that the island has a population of probably fewer people than the smallest suburb in the electorate of Cowan, and we have asked since 1979 for that island to look after federal and state services as well as local government services, it's no great surprise that the island has not prospered under that model. And so I'm very pleased as the chair of the National Capital and External Territories Joint Committee to have been involved with the members opposite and in a completely bipartisan manner, the presentation of a report which has led government to this legislation. So I completely endorse the legislation and I would say to all those present who might read the transcript of this debate later that this is an opportunity that the government has taken up and that we as a Joint Standing Committee are very happy to see implemented. Yeah, our report, Same Country, Different World, really did reflect on what was in the best interests of the people of Norfolk Island, the Australians and other residents who live on Norfolk Island. And last year when we visited, in one of the visits that we made as the Standing Committee, I talked at the administrator's residence when I got the chance to address a number of the locals, that really what we wanted was the same opportunities and the same support for Australians on Norfolk Island as there are on the mainland. And Norfolk Island has been part of Australia, has been incredibly entwined in the history of this nation since 1788, because it was shortly after, and a lot of people don't know this, but it was shortly after the first fleet established the presence in Sydney Cove that ship was sent out to Norfolk Island, and since that time Norfolk has effectively been part of the colonies and then Australia, and that is good. As I said before, since 1979 the self-government has required a range of different services to be looked after by the Norfolk Island government. And it is true, and it is no doubt that so many people in Norfolk welcome the changes that this legislation will provide, because they have seen that it has not been possible to achieve the delivery of service to the required standard. And as the member for Lingiari said, and through his wide experience in these matters and with regards to the territories, it has been a very difficult time. There have been many inquiries into the arrangements for Norfolk Island, and when you consider that Medicare does not apply and the tax system does not apply and the welfare system does not currently apply, it really has made it very difficult for Australians living on Norfolk Island. So again, I welcome this legislation and I welcome the excellent bipartisan support from both members of the committee and I think it's the whole parliament, which will see a better future for Norfolk Islanders. Before just going through some of the reforms that this the elements of this legislation will deliver. I would also, of course, like to formally thank all the members of the Joint Standing Committee that participated and used their experience, both with regards to Norfolk Island, the territories, and their broader experience to great effect in the creation of the report, Same Country, Different World. I'd also like to thank Ms Zara Edson from the Committee Secretariat for her great support to the committee, and also Alison Clegg, the Committee Secretary as well. Also to the Minister for steering what needed to be done through the ministerial processes. I also thank Minister Briggs for his excellent work. And also I would have to say that former Administrator Neil Pope was extremely helpful to us to enable us to fully understand the challenges of Norfolk Island, and his forthright and frank testimony before the committee was extremely useful to us. And of course I also thank everyone who made a submission to the committee and those that appeared before the committee as well. It was all very useful evidence to us and support to us. And also for the challenges both in recent months and in the future, the current Administrator, Mr Gary Hardgrave, our former colleague in this place, he is doing an excellent work in helping to steer the reform process on Norfolk Island and helping local people with the delivery of the results that are going to come. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'll say that the key elements that will come out of this legislation will be that there will be transitional arrangements to establish a 5-member advisory council to support and steer the implementation of the full reforms. And like the member for Lingiari, I would say that anyone who feels that they can make a good contribution to that should certainly put their name forward. There, of course, will also be the preservation of the existing administrative structures, such as the Norfolk Island Public Service during the transition period. There will be an establishment of a locally elected regional council from 1 July 2016, with the community consulted on the details of that model. There will also be the extension of all Australian taxes, with the exception, of course, of the goods and services tax and customs duty. The Norfolk Island GST will be removed, and the Australian GST, as I said before, will not be extended as a measure to assist the economy in transition. The extension of the superannuation guarantee will take place over a phased period. There will also be social security payments, including income support payments such as age and disability support pension, sickness allowance, carers payment, New Start allowance, youth allowance and special benefits, family assistance payments for family tax benefit, parental leave pay, dad and partner pay, parenting payment and childcare assistance, and supplementary payments such as rent assistance and care allowance, and also concessions such as the health concession cards. The Medicare and pharmaceutical benefit scheme and related healthcare programs will also be instituted, as will Commonwealth immigration, biosecurity and Commonwealth services. And obviously across the whole range of services and in general terms across the social welfare of the islands, these are going to have great benefits for local people. Now, I understand that modelling by the Centre for International Economics in 2014 projected that the combined impact of these measures will actually see an increase in economic activity for the island of 14% and a larger increase in household consumption of around 38%. So certainly good news. And I know that as well the cost of these measures across the next 4 years will be $136 million. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, look, I don't think I will go much further into this. I think that what we are seeing is that this is what the majority of people on Norfolk Island have wanted to see for a long time. There's been many committees, many ministers, many members of this House and the other place that have wanted to see a better future for Norfolk Island. But there have been people and interests that have gotten in the way of that and have helped stymie real reform, a better future. So I think that we've gotten to the point now where there's been genuine, strong support in a bipartisan manner, because we see that the best interests of every man, woman and child on Norfolk Island will be better served by these sort of reforms that the Minister has put forward in this legislation, and that I think we all support. And as our duties as members of Parliament, members of the Senate, members of the Executive, is to make sure that the best interests of Australians are served as much as possible, and through legislation such as this, there is a better future for Norfolk Island coming, and we have had plenty of consultation, both as a committee in interactions with people on Norfolk Island, through the processes the Minister has put in place and through what the Administrator has been doing. And whilst there are some people that desperately want to hold on to self-government, what we have seen since 1979 is that it has not worked, and that failure has come at the cost of individuals on the island and the opportunities for people on the island. And because it is part of Australia, the people on the island deserve the best future we can possibly deliver. And I look forward to the passing of this bill, the transition of Norfolk Island to the regional council model, and with the full implementation of these measures as provided for under this legislation. That better future for Norfolk Islanders and Australians and the residents of Norfolk Island is coming, and it's coming quickly. So I thank everybody that was involved with the report. Same country, different world, and also all those involved with the legislation in the best interest of Norfolk Island.
I thank the member for Cowan. The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Canberra.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And Deputy Speaker, before I begin, I'd like to commend the speeches of the member for Lingiari as well as the member for Cowan, and thank them for those contributions, which I wholeheartedly agree with. Deputy Speaker, this historical piece of legislation, and today is an historic moment, which has bipartisan support, has come about following the Joint Standing Committee on the National Capital and External Territories report into the current situation on Norfolk Island, and it follows decades of reviews, a Royal Commission, as my colleague has mentioned, recommendations, reports, inquiries, decades and decades of work and examination, close examination of the economic situation of Norfolk Island, the social situation of Norfolk Island, the health situation of Norfolk Island, a range of examinations across across the entire Norfolk Island community and society. Deputy Speaker, the committee, of which I am a member, produced the report Same Country, Different World, The Future of Norfolk Island. And the report looks at the island's prospects for economic development in the wake of falling tourism figures, a budget deficit and other ongoing financial concerns. Now, the committee recommended that, as soon as possible, the Commonwealth Government repeal the Norfolk Island Act 1979 and establish an interim administration to assist the transition to a local government-type body, which is actually going to be a regional council, determined in line with the community's needs and aspirations. And I underscore that recommendation, Deputy Speaker, determined in line with the community's needs and aspirations. And so that is exactly what this legislation aims to do. Now, in my case, I've been discussing these issues with the people of Norfolk Island for some 5 years now, both as a member of the Joint Standing Committee on the National Capital and External Territories and as the local member. I'm not sure, and I know a number of my colleagues aren't aware of this, but the Norfolk Island falls into the electoral division of Canberra. Norfolk Islanders have the option of voting in federal elections. They have the option as well as choosing which seat they want to vote in, and the majority of them vote in Canberra. Now, Deputy Speaker, as a result of that, I've visited Norfolk more than 10 times since I've been the member for Canberra. And I've attended committee hearings, I've held mobile offices and business roundtables, I've taken part in Bounty Day celebrations, I've spoken at women's and Labor functions, and I've been to school presentations. And every time I've visited the island, I've noticed a further deterioration over the last 5 years. That's why I wholeheartedly agree that by reforming the island's governance arrangements, by bringing them into the Australian taxation system and the Australian social security system, we are providing the best chance of economic, social and cultural sustainability and prosperity for the people of Norfolk Island, and the best way of preserving their human rights and their welfare, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, this legislation is part of a package of 8 bills to reform the legal and governance framework for Norfolk Island. It establishes a sustainable governance framework for Norfolk Island by transitioning the Norfolk Island Legislative Assembly to a regional council, and it moves to establish an advisory council as an interim consultative body. It also moves to establish the final governance arrangements, including the application of New South Wales state law to Norfolk Island as Commonwealth law, and to allow the Commonwealth to enter into arrangements with the New South Wales Government for the delivery of state-level services and extending certain mainland social security, immigration and health arrangements to Norfolk Island. Deputy Speaker, Norfolk Island is a small, remote island community with a shallow economic and revenue base, almost entirely reliant on the fluctuations of a fickle tourism industry, a smattering of duties and charges, and a goods and services tax. In August 2011, which is when the census was conducted on the island, Norfolk Island's population was 2,302, which included visitors. Now, anecdotal evidence suggests Norfolk's population has fallen to about 1,600 as people have left the island to seek work on the mainland. Of this decreasing population, about 200 public servants support administration responsible for every layer of government, federal, state and local, from customs, immigration, health and education to roads and rubbish. Now, successive Norfolk Island administrations have not made significant inroads into broadening and diversifying the economic base, or addressing the internal barriers and impediments to increasing tourism and business investment. In April 2013, economic activity was down some 24% on the previous year. About 40% of the shops had closed and 25% of the island's 25 to 50-year-old men had left since August 2011. Aside from a struggling economy and falling population, Norfolk Island's infrastructure is also desperately in need of upgrading, Deputy Speaker. Due to the government's dire financial situation, it is unable to pay for general repairs and upkeep on the island, and this is significantly hindering the island's economic prospects. Deputy Speaker, it's only been at the behest of the Commonwealth through the roadmap, which seeks to integrate Norfolk Island into the Australian tax and social security system, that the administration is now considering municipal rates and taking steps to abolish policies that discourage growth. In its report on the 2012-13 financial statements, the Australian National Audit Office noted that Norfolk Island administration estimated it would not hold sufficient cash and cash equivalents to cover operations in 2014-15, 2015-16 and 2016-17. So the forecast for Norfolk Island's public finances puts it in the red to the tune of $7.4 million, $7.4 million and $7.8 million respectively. And in the 27 months to June 2014, Australian taxpayers spent $40 million keeping it afloat, and I understand that over the last 5 years that's about $60 million. So, Deputy Speaker, without yearly Commonwealth bailouts, the administration just can't pay its bills, and the impact of this economic position on the residents of the island is dire. As I mentioned earlier, Deputy Speaker, I've visited Norfolk more than 10 times since I've been elected member for Canberra over the last 5 years, and the simple fact is people are struggling. They are doing it tough. Although the islanders are Australians, they pay no tax and so get no Commonwealth services. They have no access to Medicare and are not eligible for the PBS or any of the other services most of us take for granted. Norfolk is part of Australia, but because it's an external territory, Australians, but not just because it's an external territory, because of the arrangements that were set up in '79, Australians have to take their passport and fly out through the international terminal to get there. These anomalies ultimately only do harm to the people of Norfolk Island. Imagine, Deputy Speaker, being out of work in an economy doing it tough, which it is, with no access to New Start payments or job seeker support. Imagine having to work 3 to 5 jobs to make ends meet, and this is what people do, work 3 to 5 jobs, or relying on donated food parcels to feed the family each week. Now, in a recent Lateline story about Norfolk Island, and I commend John Stewart for the piece that he did just recently, resident Rachel McConnell said, and I read, I'll just quote her here, "There's a lot of people that would just wish that there were nobody like me on Norfolk. There's people that just wish that there weren't people doing it tough. But at the end of the day, a lot of people here are in comfortable positions. They own their own homes. They haven't had to go to their parents' house and beg for food. They haven't had doors slammed in their face when they ask for assistance. They haven't had to beg off the church for food parcels." And I also quote Rachel again, Deputy Speaker, "We dread having to go to the doctors because of the expense. We don't know that something minor could lead on to something larger, and you can just imagine the expense of it. I was meant to have medication, but I refused to get that because it's so expensive at $70 a box because there's no PBS. It's just something we can't. We don't have the luxury of going up to the hospital on a frequent basis for checkups or anything like that." Or, Deputy Speaker, this quote from Eve Semple, "When you can't feed your children or pay for their sporting activities, that's a high cost to pay for the notion of self-government, autonomy and self-governance." Deputy Speaker, there is no point in having self-government for self-government's sake. The first and foremost recommendation of the report Same Country, Different World, The Future of Norfolk Island, which brought about this legislation, is that the island move away from self-government. The report heard from a wide range of witnesses, including members of the Norfolk Island Legislative Assembly, the manager of Norfolk Island Tourism and community members. The committee looked over a number of the many reviews and reports that have assessed the effectiveness of self-government and questioned whether it has best served the interests of Norfolk Island residents. And the report states that this model has failed, and on many levels. Deputy Speaker, it is now clear to me that the current governance arrangements have met only the basic social and economic needs of Norfolk Island residents. For self-government to have my support, it needs to be stable, economically responsible, democratic, sustainable and in the best interests of the people it serves. This is not the case under the current governance model on Norfolk Island. Deputy Speaker, I want to underscore the fact that there will be democracy on Norfolk Island under the new arrangement. It will just take a different form. Norfolk Islanders will fall into my electorate of Canberra, as we've heard. That means they will be represented by a federal representative in the House of Representatives, and it won't be optional, it will be compulsory for them to vote, as it is in Australia and on the mainland. This is in addition to electing their own regional council, with elections to be held in early next year. Also, Deputy Speaker, I am adamant that the transition from the Assembly to a regional council needs to be carried out in close consultation with the Norfolk Island community. That's why this legislation moves to establish an advisory council consisting of 5 members to act as an interim consultative body. And as the member for Lingiari did, and I'd also echo his words, I do encourage people to nominate for that advisory council. I understand nominations have already opened, and I do encourage the Islanders to nominate for that advisory council. Deputy Speaker, consultation is something I am passionate about, and I will continue to work to ensure it is meaningful and inclusive. Deputy Speaker, before I close, I'd just like to commend a number of people who've been involved in this historic legislation, either directly or indirectly, over many, many years. I'd like to commend, of course, the committee that was involved in writing the report that got this legislation up and running, the committee chair as well as the secretariat. I'd like to commend and thank the member for Lingiari and also the former senator for the ACT, Kate Lundy, who've been deeply involved in Norfolk Island issues, as was mentioned, for almost 2 decades. I'd like to thank our former colleague Simon Crean, who started the first step in this journey by implementing the roadmap, and also the minister who took over from him, Catherine King. I'd particularly like to thank and commend Neil Pope, who was the administrator during the roadmap process, and he did a fantastic job at informing and this legislation, and of course the Jets. Neil Pope, who did a brilliant job, and his wife Jen Pope in informing the committee and assisting us in coming to this position. Finally, Deputy Speaker, I want to thank Mike King and Norfolk Labor, who have been advocating for these changes for more than 2 decades. I know that Mike was the one who actually came up with the concept of the roadmap many years ago, and that framework, those guidelines, have informed where we are today. And I want to thank Mike and I want to thank Norfolk Labor for their persistence, for their tenacity and their vision for a better future for Norfolk Island. Deputy Speaker, a new model of governance on Norfolk Island will provide the best chance of economic, social and cultural sustainability and prosperity for the people of the island. After all, it is home to an incredibly unique history and culture, and it's in the interests of all Australians to keep this history and culture alive and vibrant for centuries to come. Deputy Speaker, anyone who's visited the island appreciates its beauty and colourful history, and it's a rich and wonderful history and with a beautiful and rich language. I genuinely believe these reforms will have a beneficial impact on all Norfolk Islanders and will protect the human rights and the welfare of the residents of Norfolk Island through access to opportunity, equality and fairness. Deputy Speaker, as their federal representative, that is my primary concern, and I commend the bill to the House.
Thank you, Member for Canberra. The question is that this bill be read a second time, and I call the member for Grayndler.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Labor will be supporting these bills, which are a comprehensive response to the difficulties that have arisen around governance relationships in Norfolk Island over a considerable period of time. It is our hope that the governance arrangements included in this package will provide a sustainable improvement in the delivery of services and infrastructure to this community of around 1,800 Australians. At the current time, Norfolk Island is Australia's only self-governing external territory and the only territory that operates outside the Australian tax and social security framework. What this package does is integrate Norfolk Island into the tax and social security systems that apply to all other Australians. So there's give and take in terms of revenue responses by including Norfolk Islanders into the taxation system. There are obviously implications there. But there are also expenditure implications, which is why this legislation taken as a whole is a cost to government. And that's appropriate in terms of bringing together a system whereby a regional council will be established, providing for a state-level legislative model using New South Wales as a template. There's no doubt that some elements of this legislation are controversial, and I've had some contact with Norfolk Islanders who are concerned about parts of this legislation. And I'd say to the government that there's a need for ongoing consultation as these changes are implemented. Change is always difficult, and in terms of this process, so this is the outcome of considerable consultation up to this point, and at some point in time there needed to be a decision made and progress made. And what this legislation does is just that. It will amend the Norfolk Island Act 1979 to transition the Norfolk Island Legislative Assembly to a Norfolk Island Regional Council, with elections to be held in the first half of 2016. I must say, as a newly elected member to this House, I was somewhat surprised when I attended a Commonwealth Parliamentary Association conference and the Norfolk Island representative had one vote, the same vote that the Australian government representative had. And I think that was of surprise to me, and I think would have been of some surprise to most Australians, that those governance arrangements whereby Norfolk Island was treated almost as a separate nation, notwithstanding the fact that the tyranny of distance presents real challenges, as it does for so many Australians who live outside our highly populated areas. From this point, as a result of this legislation, Norfolk Island citizens will be required to pay taxes, including all personal and business taxes, but will be excluded from the GST. In return, they'll be entitled to access social security payments, Medicare and pharmaceutical benefits. The spur for the proposed change of governance in recent times has been the work of the Joint Standing Committee on the National Capital and External Territories, and in particular its report of October 2014, Same Country, Different World. It's important to acknowledge the work that's been undertaken by this committee, and I want to particularly acknowledge the work of my colleagues, the member for Lingari and the member for Canberra, who've worked so hard on these issues, who are passionate about making a difference to the lives of Norfolk Islanders. And I think it's important that any legislation of significant change such as this be pursued in a bipartisan way. And often our parliamentary committees do just that and enable issues to be debated. There's no doubt that the committee, I believe, will have an ongoing role, and it would be appropriate, in my view, to have an assessment of how these changes have impacted in reality within the first couple of years of it operating, to ensure that there aren't consequences that are unintended and weren't envisaged as these substantial governance changes go forward. This inquiry focused on the island's prospects for economic development in the wake of a significant decline in tourism, a large deficit and ongoing financial management concerns. There's no doubt that the existing arrangements couldn't simply be allowed to continue into the future. Would have been quite irresponsible, given the hardships that the member for Canberra just so eloquently outlined to the House. However, this report, of course, isn't a one-off. It included many inquiries. There's been a Royal Commission that have looked at matters to do with Norfolk since self-government was established some 36 years ago. In 2014, the National Audit Office forecast ongoing budget deficits of over $7 million a year and found that the current administration was not a going concern. These bills, therefore, have not emerged from a vacuum. The former government put in place a roadmap for reform in 2011 by the then Minister Simon Crean, who was very determined to pursue these issues. At that point, the government provided emergency funding and support for infrastructure projects. However, the state of infrastructure remains in long-term decline. Important federal functions on an island such as Norfolk include immigration, customs and quarantine, which simply at the moment aren't able to be sustainably provided. The committee looked in its recent report at the state of infrastructure on the island. In order to provide the economic development and support for key industries like tourism, Norfolk needs good quality sea and air access, roads, electricity and communications networks. The standard and safety surrounding the two piers, Kingston and Cascade, is of particular concern and one that occupies the time of my former Department of Infrastructure when I was had the honour of being the Minister. The lack of quality infrastructure to safely convey people and freight from ships to shore is preventing greater involvement of cruise ship operators at a time when the opportunities are abundant from this rapidly growing sector. Norfolk is a highly sought-after cruise destination. The completion of Cascade Pier upgrade will need ongoing Commonwealth support. The former government allocated $13 million to this project under the Regional Development Australia Fund program. I note the current government's infrastructure re-announcement tour extends beyond the mainland, and the same $13 million grant for this project was re-announced by the Assistant Minister in March of this year. It is a good thing that that grant provided by Labor, cut by the coalition, has been restored by the government. The department has indicated that a program to repair a large number of the roads that are in a bad state will take a number of years. The committee concluded that only the Commonwealth could fund the necessary works. Under current arrangements, Norfolk Island is unable to access funding sources like the Roads to Recovery program and financial assistance grants. This places Norfolk Island as a remote community in a less advantageous position for funding than other remote communities. The efforts of the Australian government have also contributed to underwriting an airline service to the island. It's a bipartisan view of the committee and indeed of this parliament, as a result of this legislation receiving broad support, that the time has come to integrate Norfolk Island's revenue and services with arrangements that apply to the rest of Australia. So I commend the bills to the House.
I thank the member for Graindler. The question is that this bill be now read a second time. Minister.
Deputy Speaker, I move the bill. Can I just thank all the members who've participated in the debate, particularly the member for Canberra, who's had a long interest, and the member for Lingiari, the member for Graindler, his contribution he's just made, and also the member for Cowan, who is the chair of the JSC Net committee, who penned the Same Country, Different World report, which the government is in respect responding to with these changes. I do agree with some of the comments from all the speakers, and I welcome the support of the Labor Party too. I should mention for these reforms, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is not just out of one report that we're moving these changes. This has been a long time coming, and in fact the previous government, and I commend the work of the previous Minister Simon Crean in this respect, took many steps down this path, and also the former Administrator Neil Pope for the work that they did in getting this to this point. A couple of points raised, particularly by the member for Graindler, I can't let pass. The infrastructure on the island, he's right about. It hasn't been upgraded since the 1970s, and we've begun already a review of what road funding will be required and what we need to do on the island to actually invest in some of the infrastructure needs to upgrade the roads and so forth. So we've moved on that already before the legislation has even passed the parliament. On the Cascade Port, it's not true to say that that was cut. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that money remained there the whole time. The issue was it couldn't be delivered by the Norfolk Island government, and so what we've said is that we will deliver it. So we'll actually get the project to not just to be on a piece of paper, which was so common with the member for Graindler when he was minister, that he would announce projects, but they wouldn't actually happen. We're actually making sure that they're delivered. Now, with that bit of partisanship, Mr. Deputy Speaker, can I say this reform will deliver on the election commitment to extend taxation, social security and healthcare services to Norfolk Island. These changes deliver equity to Norfolk Island and ensure residents have access to essential services that all Australians deserve. This package of bills also delivers much-needed governance reform. Unlike any other community of its size, Norfolk Island is currently required to deliver local, state and federal law. This has not been sustainable, and the situation is now critical. Infrastructure on Norfolk Island is run down and at risk of collapse. The health system is not up to standard and many laws are out of date. Numerous investigations, including a Royal Commission, 12 parliamentary inquiries and 20 expert reports have all called for a change. The Norfolk Island government has also acknowledged that the current arrangements are unsustainable. The Australian government has undertaken extensive consultation, demonstrating strong support for change. It's demonstrated particularly through the bipartisan nature of this debate. The government will continue to consult with the local community, including on the model for the Norfolk Island Regional Council. Local services will continue to be delivered locally, national services will be delivered by the federal government, and New South Wales will be engaged to provide state-level services. For those who claim, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that this removes self-government, can I say they are wrong? People on Norfolk Island will vote for local people to represent them on their local issues. They'll have a voice in the national parliament through the member for Canberra, and they will have the opportunity, like never before, to vote not only in the federal elections but also in local elections. Consultations will continue to be a very important part of this reform process, and can I thank the Administrator Gary Hargraves for the work he's done so far with talking to the community, and from my department for the hard work they've put into consulting with the community. We're establishing an office on Norfolk Island, Mr Deputy Speaker, to ensure that people will be able to access important information so that they can engage with the Australian entitlement system and taxation system. We are also establishing a community consultation committee which will begin its work when these bills pass the parliament. And in that respect, I'm very pleased that the Speaker of the current Norfolk Island Parliament, Mr David Buffett, has agreed to participate in that committee. We'll make announcements in respect to the other members of that committee in the coming weeks. Mr Deputy Speaker, these reforms will put Norfolk Island on the path to sustainability and will deliver certainty for this unique part of Australia. I commend these bills to the House.
I thank the Minister. The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I put the question. Those in favour say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clerk.
Second reading. Bill for an Act to amend the Norfolk Island Act 1979 and for other purposes.
I have received a message from His Excellency the Governor-General recommending, in accordance with Section 56 of the Constitution, an appropriation for the purposes of this bill. Is leave granted for the third reading to be moved immediately?
Leave is granted.
Minister.
I move that this bill now be read a third time.
I put the question that this bill be read a third time. Those in favour say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clerk.
Third reading. A bill for an Act to amend the Norfolk Island Act 1979 and for other purposes. Government Business, Order of the Day number 2, Tax and Superannuation Laws Amendment, Norfolk Island Reforms Bill 2015, resumption of debate on the second reading.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I put the question. Those in favour say aye. Those against no. I think the ayes have it. Clerk.
Second reading. A bill for an Act to amend the law relating to taxation and superannuation and for related purposes.
I have received a message from His Excellency the Governor-General recommending, in accordance with Section 56 of the Constitution, an appropriation for the purposes of this bill. Is leave granted for the third reading to be moved immediately?
Yes.
Leave is granted. Minister.
I move that this bill now be read a third time.
I put the question that this bill be now read a third time. Those in favour say aye. Against no. I think the ayes have it. Clerk.
Third reading. A bill for an Act to amend the law relating to taxation and superannuation and for related purposes. Government Business, Order of the Day number 3, a new tax system, Medicare levy surcharge, fringe benefits amendment bill 2015, resumption of debate on the second reading.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I put the question. Those in favour say aye. Those against no. I think the ayes have it. Clerk.
Second reading. A bill for an Act to amend a new tax system, Medicare levy surcharge, Fringe Benefits Act 1999 and for related purposes.
Is leave granted for the third reading to be moved immediately?
Yes, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Leave is granted. Minister.
I move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be now read a third time. I put the question. Those in favour say aye. Against no. I think the ayes have it. Clerk.
Third reading. A bill for an Act to amend a new tax system, Medicare levy surcharge, Fringe Benefits Act 1999 and for related purposes. Government Business, Order of the Day number 4, Health and Other Services Compensation Care Charges Amendment, Norfolk Island Bill 2015, resumption of debate on the second reading.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I put the question. Those in favour say aye. Against no. I think the ayes have it. Clerk.
Second reading. A bill for an Act to amend the Health and Other Services Compensation Care Charges Act 1995 and for related purposes.
Is leave granted for the third reading to be moved immediately?
Yes, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Minister.
I move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be now read a third time. I put the question. Those in favour say aye. Those against no. I think the ayes have it. Clerk.
Third reading, a bill for an act to amend the Health and Other Services Compensation Care Charges Act 1995 and for related purposes. Government Business Order of the Day number 5, Health Insurance Approved Pathology Specimen Collection Centres, Tax Amendment, Norfolk Island Bill 2015, resumption of debate on the second reading.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I put the question. Those in favour say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clerk.
Second reading, a bill for an act to amend the Health Insurance Approved Pathology Specimen Collection Centres Tax Act 2000 and for related purposes.
Is leave granted for the third reading to be moved immediately?
Yes, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Minister.
I move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that this bill be now read a third time. I put the question. Those in favour say aye. Those against say no. Clerk.
Third reading, a bill for an act to amend the Health Insurance Approved Pathology Specimen Collection Centres Tax Act 2000 and for related purposes.
I hope the commentators are explaining to the general public what is going on here. The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I put the question. Those in favour say aye. Against no. I think the ayes have it. Clerk.
Second reading, a bill for an act to amend the Health Insurance Pathology Fees Act 1991 and for related purposes.
Is leave granted for the third reading to be moved immediately?
Leave is granted.
Leave is granted. Minister.
I move that this bill be now read a third time.
I put the question that this bill be now read a third time. Those in favour say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clerk.
Third reading, a bill for an act to amend the Health Insurance Pathology Fees Act 1991 and for related purposes. Government Business Order of the Day number 7, Aged Care Accommodation Payment Security Levy Amendment, Norfolk Island Bill 2015.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I put the question. Those in favour say aye. Against no. I believe the ayes have it. Clerk.
Second reading, a bill for an act to amend the Aged Care Accommodation Payment Security Levy Act 2006 and for related purposes.
Is leave granted for the third reading to be moved immediately?
And leave is granted.
Minister.
I move that this bill be now read a third time.
I put the question that this bill be now read a third time. Those in favour say aye. Against no. I think the ayes have it. Clerk.
Third reading, a bill for an act to amend the Aged Care Accommodation Payment Security Levy Act 2006 and for related purposes. Government Business Order of the Day number 8, Private Health Insurance Risk Equalisation Levy Amendment, Norfolk Island Bill 2015.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Gorton. Oh, we've still one to go, have we? Sorry, I'm on rehabilitation. Number 7, number 8. No, I can't do that. The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I put the question. Those in favour say aye. Against no. I think the ayes have it. Clerk.
Reading, a bill for an act to amend the Private Health Insurance Risk Equalisation Levy Act 2003 and for related purposes.
Is leave granted for the third reading to be moved? No.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yes, it is.